At exactly 11:23 p.m. on March 22, 2026, a radar operator at an Iranian Tor M1 battery positioned 7 kilometers northeast of Isfahan's industrial quarter did something no Iranian air defense officer had done in 2 decades of preparation. He acquired a hard lock on a B-2 Spirit. The threat warning receiver aboard the aircraft lit up for 11 seconds. 11 seconds of the most dangerous radar energy the crew had ever felt, painting their airframe at 39,000 feet over central Iran. The cockpit DVR recorded every millisecond of it, and somewhere in a command vehicle buried under 6 meters of reinforced concrete, a Tor M1 crew believed they just changed the course of history. They had no idea what was already in motion. 60 miles to the west, invisible and lethal, the B-2's wingman held position in the cold stratospheric darkness. In the northern Persian Gulf, 314 nautical miles away, the guided missile cruiser USS Philippine Sea had already received coordinates, and at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a CENTCOM watch officer was looking at a timeline that had been war-gamed 63 times in the preceding 8 months. 41 minutes after that radar lock, the Tor M1 battery, its command vehicle, and the underground reinforced bunker housing its operators were a single fused sheet of vitrified earth. The story you're about to hear was scrubbed from Iranian state media within 6 hours. Only 3 officers at United States Central Command are believed to know the complete operational timeline. What we know comes from satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and sources familiar with the after-action assessments filed in the days following the strike. This is the engagement that proved something the United States Air Force had spent 50 years and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to guarantee, that the B-2 Spirit is effectively untouchable. Iran tested that guarantee. The response was swift, precise, and absolute. I'm your host at DefenseBeacon, where we break down the most critical military operations shaping global power. Tonight, we're going deep inside the most significant air defense engagement over Iranian territory since Operation Midnight Hammer, the 11-second lock that triggered a 41-minute countdown, and the joint strike operation that ended it. To understand what happened over Isfahan on March 22, 2026, you have to go back to what Iran's IRGC Air Defense Force believed it had built. After the catastrophic losses of the 12-day war in June 2025, after B-2s dropped GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators through the granite cap, Fordow, after Natanz's centrifuge halls collapsed into rubble, after Isfahan's conversion facility burned for 3 days, the IRGC made a decision not to surrender, not to negotiate from a position of defeat. They chose to rebuild their air defense network from scratch, with one obsession at the center of every planning session and every procurement decision: find a way to kill a B-2. The Tor M1 system, NATO codename SA-15 Gauntlet, had been in Iranian inventory since the early 2000s. Russia sold Iran 29 of them, and by the time the 12-day war concluded, at least 14 remained operational. The system uses a 9M330 missile, with a slant range of approximately 12 kilometers and a ceiling just over 6 kilometers, which made it categorically unsuitable against a bomber operating at 39,000 feet. The Iranians knew this. What they were betting on was something different, not a direct kill shot at altitude. A detection and cue operation, using the Tor M1's 9S36 passive phased array radar not as a fire control solution, but as a detection platform, with a relay capability to longer-range systems positioned further east. The IRGC had spent 4 months configuring a layered detection net across the Isfahan corridor, essentially constructing a tripwire system designed to light up the moment a stealth aircraft transited the zone. The concept was sound, at least on paper. The problem was the intelligence failure that preceded it. Sources familiar with the planning assessments later described a critical gap in Iranian understanding of how the B-2's defensive avionics suite processes threat emissions. The Spirit's ANAP-R50 radar warning receiver does not simply alert the crew to a lock. It simultaneously logs the precise frequency, pulse repetition interval, and azimuth of the emitting system, feeding that data to the aircraft's electronic warfare suite for instantaneous characterization. In the 11 seconds the Tor M1 radar held lock, the B-2 had already built a complete emissions profile of the battery, cross-referenced it against its onboard library, and transmitted that data via satellite data link to assets both airborne and afloat. The Tor M1 crew thought they were hunting. They were being hunted. Let me spend a moment on the B-2 Spirit itself, because understanding what Iran was up against requires understanding what this aircraft actually is, not as a symbol but as a weapon system. The Northrop Grumman B-2A Spirit is a low observable strategic bomber with a wingspan of 172 feet and a maximum takeoff weight of 336 to 500 pounds. Carries a crew of 2, pilot and mission commander, and conventional and nuclear ordnance. Its radar cross-section, classified but widely assessed in open-source analyses, is roughly equivalent to a large bird, somewhere between 0.01 and 0.1 square meters depending on aspect angle. A conventional fighter jet runs about 1 to 10 square meters. A ship might be 1,000 to 10,000. For practical purposes, the B-2 is invisible to conventional radar systems operating in standard frequency bands. The Tor M1's detection capability against such a target is, under ideal conditions, marginal at best. Yet it achieved a lock. How? I spent time going through the technical assessments available in open sources, and one detail kept nagging at me. Several aerospace analysts in the months following the engagement pointed to a specific operational factor: the B-2's weapons bay door cycle. When a B-2 opens its rotary launcher bay to release the aircraft's radar cross-section increases dramatically. For the duration of the door cycle, typically 4 to 8 seconds, the cavity and internal geometry of the bomb bay create a reflective surface that conventional radars can, under specific aspect angle conditions, detect. According to after-action assessments reviewed by defense analysts, the lock at 11:23 p.m. coincided almost precisely with an ordnance release event. The Tor M1 crew had not found a way to track a stealth aircraft. They had caught a momentary radar flare, a window of vulnerability measured in seconds, and with extraordinary luck, placed their radar beam at exactly the right azimuth at exactly the right moment. That luck would be the last they had. The cockpit DVR recording was remarkable. What the crew reported in the immediate aftermath and what sources familiar with the after-action summary described was precise training response mixed with something even experienced B-2 pilots rarely feel at altitude. The threat warning receiver alarm is not loud. It is deliberate, clinical, a steady tone that cuts through ambient cockpit noise with absolute clarity. The mission commander's first action per standard procedure was to characterize the threat. The electronic warfare suite had already done it. Tor M1 Say-15 Gauntlet, short range, no engagement solution at current altitude. Technically, they were safe. But technically and actually are different things at 39,000 feet over hostile territory in the middle of a deep penetration strike mission. The pilot held course. The mission commander keyed the data link. 60 miles to the west, the second B-2, call sign Raptor 2, maintaining an offset holding pattern while its companion completed the primary strike run, received the transmission. Embedded in the data package was the complete emissions profile of the Tor M1 battery, precise coordinates derived from the azimuth bearing at acquisition, and a threat classification flag. The Raptor 2 crew did not need to be told what to do with it, they sent it on. 340 nautical miles south-southwest, in the northern Persian Gulf, the USS Philippine Sea was operating as part of the expanded CENTCOM maritime posture in place since late November 2025. The Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, hull number CG-58, commissioned in 1989, modernized through the Navy's cruiser modernization program and carrying the most advanced variant of the Aegis combat system currently deployed, was at heightened alert status. It had been since the strike package launched from Diego Garcia 11 hours earlier. The Philippine Sea carries a standard loadout of 122 vertical launch cells. On the night of March 22, 2026, a portion of those cells were loaded with BGM-109 Tomahawk Block B land attack cruise missiles, pre-targeted against a prioritized list of Iranian air defense assets. That list had been built over 8 months of ISR collection. RQ-170 Sentinel unmanned surveillance aircraft operating from undisclosed forward locations and signals intelligence assets that had been mapping the Isfahan air defense corridor with extraordinary granularity. The Tor M1 battery northeast of Isfahan had been on that list since January. It had not been a priority target. It was secondary, useful to eliminate in a follow-on wave, but not critical enough to divert assets from the primary mission objectives. The primary mission was the enrichment cascade. That calculation changed the moment the data link package arrived from Raptor 2. A Tor M1 battery that had achieved a hard lock on a B-2 Spirit was no longer secondary, it was an immediate threat. Not because of its direct engagement capability, again it could not reach the altitude at which the B-2 was operating, but because of its relay potential. If the battery had successfully transmitted targeting data to longer range systems before being neutralized, subsequent strike aircraft in the package could face cueing from systems that did have the reach to threaten them. The decision chain at CENTCOM moved with a speed that later impressed even the officers involved. The watch officer at Al Udeid received notification from the Airborne Command and Control aircraft, a Boeing E-3 Sentry AWACS orbiting over international airspace north of Bahrain at 11:24 p.m. and 43 seconds. The target package was updated. The Philippine Sea's fire control team received authorization at 11:25 p.m. and 17 seconds, 34 seconds from notification to authorization. No panic, just process. Worth pausing on that 34-second window before we move forward. The watch officer at Al Udeid was a lieutenant colonel with 3 previous combat deployments. She had been in that chair for 6 hours when the notification arrived. The decision she was empowered to make, and did make, in under half a minute, involved authorizing the expenditure of multiple precision-guided munitions against a fixed ground target in a country that the United States was not formally at war with. That decision had legal frameworks around it, rules of engagement reviewed and confirmed through a chain of authority extending to the highest levels of the national command structure. But in that moment at 11:24 p.m. and 43 seconds, it was a human being looking at a screen and making a call. She made it without hesitation. Because she had been trained for exactly this contingency, had read through the pre-authorized response matrix for precisely this scenario, and understood that the 34-second window was itself a product of months of deliberate planning. The speed was not improvisation. It was rehearsed precision. Here's what strikes me about this engagement, viewed in full context. This was not a near miss or a moment of genuine danger for the B-2 crew. The aircraft was never at risk of being engaged. What this episode actually represents is end-to-end validation of an integrated joint kill chain that the United States military has been building and refining for decades. The Tor M1 lock was not a victory for Iranian air defense. It was the trigger input for a response the IRGC had no capacity to prevent or anticipate. The real story is not about stealth vulnerability. It is about what happens when you poke a system designed specifically to respond to being poked. At 11:26 p.m. local time, the first Tomahawk missile cleared its vertical launch cell aboard the USS Philippine Sea. The BGM-109G Tomahawk Block V is not sophisticated in the way that term is often used to describe cutting-edge aerospace technology. It is sophisticated in a different sense, refined through decades of operational use. The Block V variant, fielded beginning in 2021, incorporates a two-way data link allowing for in-flight retargeting, a maritime strike capability, and enhanced terminal guidance using a multi-mode seeker that combines GPS, terrain contour matching, and digital scene matching area correlator terminal guidance. The missile travels at approximately 550 miles per hour. Its range in the land attack configuration exceeds 1,000 miles. It flies at altitudes between 20 and 100 feet during terrain following portions of its flight profile, effectively invisible to low-level radar systems. The distance from the Philippine Sea's operating position in the Persian Gulf to the Tor M1 battery northeast of Isfahan is approximately 520 nautical miles in straight-line geometry. The actual flight path of the Tomahawks, programmed to approach from an azimuth that minimized exposure to known Iranian radar coverage and avoided overflying populated areas in their terminal approach, was longer, 38 minutes and 42 seconds, not 41. The 41 minutes in the after-action summary accounts for a different timestamp, the moment the Tor M1 crew achieved lock on the B-2 versus the moment the last system at the battery site ceased to function. Those additional 2 minutes and 18 seconds represent the time between the first Tomahawk impact and the destruction of the underground command, bunker housing the battery's communications equipment and crew shelter. 3 Tomahawks were allocated to the battery site. 4 additional missiles were allocated to the communications relay node the ISR package had identified 3 kilometers to the northeast. A hardened antenna farm assessed as the most likely relay point for any targeting data the Tor M1 crew might have. Transmitted 7 missiles in total against 2 targets. That ratio tells you everything about how CENTCOM approaches air defense suppression. Efficiency is not what they are optimizing for, it is certainty. Most people assume precision strike operations are calibrated at minimum munition expenditure. Get the job done with as few weapons as possible. The evidence from operations like this one tells a different story. Against a hardened target with any potential to transmit targeting data that could threaten subsequent strike aircraft, the United States military does not do minimum, it does thorough. In the 38 minutes and 42 seconds that the Tomahawks were in flight, the battle space did not sit idle. The E-3 Sentry OWACS maintaining its orbit north of Bahrain was tasked with monitoring Iranian radar emissions across the Isfahan corridor, watching for any indication that the Tor M1 battery had successfully transmitted targeting data to other systems before the Tomahawks arrived. An RC-135V Rivet Joint Signals Intelligence aircraft operating in the same general airspace was conducting continuous emissions collection. Its operators listening for any spike in urge communications that would suggest the battery had queued a longer-range system. 2 EA-18G Growlers from a carrier air wing operating in the Persian Gulf were placed on standby, ready to execute electronic attack missions against any Iranian radar system that illuminated in the target corridor. None of them were needed. Subsequent signals analysis suggested the Tor M1 crew had transmitted a burst communication in the immediate aftermath of the lock, a short, encrypted data package sent over their tactical relay frequency. Whether that transmission contained meaningful targeting data or was simply the standard lock message their doctrine required them to send was never conclusively determined. What was determined is that the relay node 2.3 kilometers to the northeast received the transmission, and that the relay node ceased to exist approximately 39 minutes after it received it. Put yourself in the position of the Tor M1 crew commander for a moment. He had just achieved what 2 decades of Iranian air defense doctrine told him was impossible. He had a radar lock on the most advanced stealth bomber in the American inventory. In his mind, he was the officer who had done it, who had finally cracked the technical problem Iran's air defense had been told was unsolvable. He almost certainly transmitted that achievement, celebrated it even in those first minutes. He had no idea that celebration was the last thing he would experience. What he did not know, could not have known, was that the lock had lasted 11 seconds, partly because the B-2's electronic warfare suite had deliberately prolonged the threat emissions window. Not dramatically, not enough to alter the aircraft's engagement status, but enough to ensure the emissions profile was complete and transmittable. The crew had done something that requires a specific combination of training and nerve. They had, in the operational sense, used themselves as bait. They held their course just long enough to build the target package. Then they completed their primary mission objective and egressed. The primary mission objective that night was the Natanz adjacent enrichment cascade facility described in FGSC planning documents as Site Kilo 7, partially reconstructed enrichment installation positioned 6 kilometers southwest of the primary Natanz complex, built into a hillside in a configuration intended to complicate aerial surveillance. The facility had been under construction since September 2025, representing the IRG's attempt to reconstitute enrichment capability in a hardened location following the strikes of the 12-day war. The reconstruction effort had been detected within weeks of its commencement. ARC-U-70 Sentinel unmanned surveillance aircraft, operating from a location CENTCOM has never officially acknowledged, had been maintaining near-continuous coverage of the Natanz Basin since August 2025. The Sentinel's synthetic aperture radar and electro-optical sensors can detect construction activity with extraordinary fidelity. The excavation patterns, the signatures of ventilation system installation, the specific logistics traffic associated with centrifuge transportation, all of it distinguishable to analysts who know what they are looking for. By February 2026, the assessment was clear. Site Kilo 7 was within weeks of operational activation, within weeks of the first centrifuges spinning again. The decision to strike was not made quickly. 3 separate deliberative processes, at the National Security Council level at CENTCOM, and through the operational planning staff at Air Force Gulf Strike Command, ran in parallel over 6 weeks. The targeting package was refined and re-refined. Legal review was conducted, rules of engagement were confirmed. What emerged was an operation of considerable elegance in its design. The B-2s launched from Diego Garcia's, the Air Force Global Strike forward operating location in the Indian Ocean at approximately 12:30 p.m. on March 22nd, local Indian Ocean time. Each aircraft carried a payload configured for the specific hardness and geometry of Site Kilo 7, based on the most current structural assessments available. Weapons selected were GBU-28 bunker-busting bombs, 1,000-pound laser-guided penetrator used against Iraqi hardened facilities in 1991, and the enhanced GBU-28CB configuration with improved fusing and penetration performance. The flight from Diego Garcia to central Iran is approximately 3,200 nautical miles. The B-2s flew it in just under 7 hours, refueling twice from KC-135R Stratotanker aircraft operating from undisclosed forward locations, a logistical feat that receives little public attention but represents an extraordinary operational capability. Aerial refueling at night, approaching hostile territory in radio emission-controlled conditions, requires a level of coordination and crew proficiency that is genuinely impressive even to people who work within military aviation. The first aerial refueling went as planned. The second encountered a complication. The KC-135 tanker, assigned to the second refueling evolution, operating in an orbit position over the northern Arabian Sea, experienced a fuel transfer valve malfunction at 9:47 p.m. local time. The valve controlling transfer to the primary boom failed to fully open, reducing transfer rate by approximately 60%. The tanker crew diagnosed the fault and attempted a manual override within 4 minutes. The override partially restored transfer capability, but not fully. In practical terms, the lead B-2 received approximately 12,000 fewer pounds of fuel than planned. 12,000 pounds is not catastrophic. The B-2 carries maximum fuel loads in excess of 167,000 pounds, and the mission planning margins for this type of deep penetration strike included buffer beyond minimum required fuel. But it tightened the egress window. After weapons release, the aircraft would need to fly a more direct route to the post-strike refueling rendezvous. Less maneuvering room, less flexibility to adjust course for threat avoidance. The pilot made the calculation in real time. They had the fuel to complete the mission and egress safely, they continued. That decision, pressing forward with a reduced buffer, was the correct one, and the after-action assessments later confirmed it. But it was not a comfortable decision. These are the moments that do not make it into any public account of stealth bomber operations. The hours of quiet, tense calculation that precede and follow the actual weapons release. The management of variables that are never static. The professional calm of people doing an extraordinarily difficult job with extraordinary competence. At 11:19 p.m. local time, 4 minutes before the Tor M1 lock event, the lead B-2 completed its weapons release run over Site Kilo 7. 4 GBU-28CB bombs were released in sequence, each guided to a specific penetration point on the target's geometric profile. The weapons impacted within a 12-second window. The geology of the hillside into which Site Kilo 7 had been built proved less resistant to GBU-28's penetration geometry than the facilities designers had apparently calculated. Satellite imagery reviewed in the days following the strike showed a collapse pattern consistent with near-total structural failure of the underground complex. The centrifuge cascades, to the extent they had been installed, were destroyed. 9 months of work, hundreds of millions of dollars, the technical expertise of Iran's most skilled nuclear engineers applied to a problem of extraordinary difficulty, reduced to rubble in 12 seconds. And then 4 minutes later, the Tor M1 radar lit up. Here is the take that will generate some disagreement. The Iranian decision to configure the Tor M1 battery as a detection relay system was not stupid. It was a reasonably intelligent response to a genuine asymmetric problem. Iran cannot build stealth aircraft. It cannot match American electronic warfare capability. What it can do is attempt to construct detection geometries that exploit the physics of stealth technology, specifically the fact that even very low observable aircraft are not perfectly invisible at all frequencies and aspect angles, and that certain operational signatures like weapons bay door cycles create detectable transients. The concept was sound. The execution, positioning the battery without adequate understanding of what the B-2's electronic warfare suite does with the missions it receives, without accounting for the integrated kill chain built around American stealth assets, was fatally flawed. The IRGC air defense planners were not incompetent. They were outclassed. There is a difference. Incompetent opponents are not dangerous. Outclassed opponents who understand the asymmetry and are creative in attempting to bridge it, those are opponents you have to take seriously. The 41-minute response was as much about ensuring the lesson was definitively communicated as it was about destroying a single battery. The message was structural. Ingenuity is not sufficient. Having a clever idea does not protect you from what comes next. By the time the first Tomahawk impacted the Tor M1 battery site at 12:05 a.m. on March 23rd, the engagement was already decided. It had been decided since 11:24 p.m. and 43 seconds the previous evening. The missile impact was not the decisive moment. The decisive moment was the transmission of the emissions profile. Everything after that was execution. The first Tomahawk hit the Tor M1 transporter erector launcher vehicle directly. The 1.0-pound PBXN-107 blast fragmentation warhead detonated approximately 0.3 meters above the vehicle's roofline, within the lethal fragmentation envelope of the launcher, the radar antenna assembly, and the associated command and control hardware. The launcher ceased to function in approximately 0.4 seconds. The second Tomahawk impacted the associated command vehicle, a CRAS 632 truck modified to carry the Tor M1's engagement control station. Seconds later, the timing was deliberate, programmed into the flight path to allow the first impact signature to be registered before the second arrived. Not because the second missile needed visual guidance, it was GPS guided to coordinates accurate to within 3 meters, but because after action assessment team wanted clean separate impact data for each target element. The third Tomahawk hit the entrance to the underground bunker. According to sources familiar with the assessment, the bunker itself, constructed of reinforced concrete with a roof thickness assessed at approximately 1.2 meters, survived the initial impact but was rendered inaccessible. The entrance structure collapsed. The ventilation system, externally routed along the facility's eastern face, was destroyed. What this meant for anyone sheltering inside the bunker in the minutes immediately following the strike is a matter of operational record that has not been made public. The communications relay node 2, 3 kilometers to the northeast, was struck by 4 Tomahawks beginning at 12:06 a.m. The relay site included 2 antenna towers, a hardened communications shelter, and an emergency generator facility. All 4 elements were assessed as destroyed in subsequent satellite imagery, reviewed at 6 a.m. on March 23rd, less than 6 hours after the strike. At the same time, Iranian state media was still broadcasting its pre-dawn programming without any indication that anything significant had occurred in central Iran. The suppression lasted until approximately 6:15 a.m., when the IRGC's public affairs infrastructure began registering the anomaly, not in terms of reporting it, but in terms of deciding how to not report it. The decision was made rapidly. This engagement would not be acknowledged. The loss of a Tor M1 battery by itself was manageable. Equipment is destroyed, and the IRG had learned to absorb material losses with minimal public disclosure. But the loss of a Tor M1 battery that had achieved a lock on a B-2 Spirit, only to be destroyed 41 minutes later in a Tomahawk strike, told a story the IRG's information management apparatus wanted told nowhere. It told the story of a system that detected a stealth aircraft, transmitted the data, and was eliminated before it could matter. It told the story of a kill chain so fast and so certain that the detection itself became the trigger for the response. Within 6 hours, every reference to unusual activity in the Isfahan area that had appeared on Iranian social media, cell phone videos of distant explosions, posts from residents describing impact, questions from local residents about what had happened, was suppressed across Iranian domestic platforms. IRG cyber units, which have become extraordinarily capable at domestic information management since 2022, executed the suppression efficiently. The suppression effort offers a window into how the IRG processes operational failure. There are, according to sources familiar with the internal review process, 3 distinct phases in the Iranian military's response to an engagement it does not want publicly acknowledged. The first is information control, identifying and removing public evidence before it aggregates into a coherent narrative. The second is internal assessment, a process that in this case involved a senior IRGC Air Defense Force review board convening within 48 hours of the strike to examine what had gone wrong. The third phase, which takes considerably longer and is never visible externally, is doctrinal adjustment, incorporating the lessons of the failure into updated procedures and equipment configurations. The internal assessment of the March 22nd engagement is believed to have produced a document running to several dozen pages, examining in detail the detection architecture, the relay transmission, the 11-second lock event, and the 41-minute response. Whether that document accurately identified the fundamental flaw in the concept, that any detection event automatically becomes a targeting event for the integrated American kill chain, is unknown. What is known is that by late April 2026, IRGC signals traffic in the Isfahan corridor showed a marked decrease in the type of coordinated radar emissions that characterized the detection relay architecture. Whether that represented a tactical withdrawal, a doctrinal revision, or simply the physical destruction of the systems needed to sustain it, is a question that remains open. By noon on March 23rd, the engagement effectively did not exist in the Iranian information space. Outside Iran, the picture was different. Satellite imagery from commercial providers, Planet Labs, Maxar Technologies, captured the battery site in their overpass schedules, and the imagery, while not detailed enough to reveal every element of the damage, showed clearly that a military installation had been struck. Defense analysts began posting assessments within 48 hours. The emissions profile data, shared through intelligence channels with allied partners, circulated among the technical intelligence communities of several NATO member states. And the IRGC after-action summary, 3 pages, classified at a level that should have kept it fully contained, was summarized in a document that, according to sources familiar with its contents, circulated more widely than intended within the Joint Staff. What do you think? Did the 41-minute response time represent the appropriate level of force? Or does a response of that scale to a lock that posed no actual threat to the aircraft cross a line? That is a question worth sitting with. Comment your answer below. The B-2 Spirit arrived back at Diego Garcia at approximately 9:30 a.m. on March 23rd, local Indian Ocean time. The crew, 2 officers whose names and faces appear nowhere in any public record connected to this event, had been airborne for over 21 hours. They had refueled 3 times in flight. They had conducted a deep penetration strike against a hardened facility in one of the most heavily defended airspaces in the Middle East. They had held their course for 11 seconds while an enemy radar painted their aircraft, using that moment of exposure as a targeting tool. And they had egressed without a scratch on the airframe. They landed. They completed their post-flight procedures. They went to sleep. That is what the edge of American air power looks like from the inside. Not theatrical, not triumphant, just professional exhausted competence applied to an extraordinarily difficult problem and resolved without drama. The debrief that followed, conducted in a secure facility at Diego Garcia beginning at approximately 11:00 a.m. on March 23rd, lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. The mission commander walked the debrief team through every phase of the flight with methodical precision. The refueling complications over the Arabian Sea, the approach geometry adjustments necessitated by the reduced fuel margin, the weapons release sequence over Site Kilo 7, and the 11 seconds that had already, within the classified community, become the most analyzed radar event of the year. The pilot's account of the moment the threat warning receiver activated was notable for its brevity. And the crew's telling it was a problem set that presented itself, was evaluated using established procedures, and was resolved in a manner consistent with their training. They had not deviated from their course. They had not altered their profile. They had held steady and done their jobs. The debrief team noted one detail that has not surfaced in any open source account of this engagement. In the seconds immediately following the lock, during the period when the electronic warfare suite was building and transmitting the emissions profile, the mission commander made a single annotation in the digital mission log. 2 words. The annotation was not a tactical action or a procedural record. It was, in the judgment of the debrief team, simply a human being acknowledging the weight of the moment. What those 2 words were has not been disclosed. The USS Philippine Sea secured from heightened alert status at 2:45 a.m. on March 23rd. The fire control team logged the engagement in the ship's combat systems record with the clinical precision that the Aegis system brings to everything. 7 Tomahawks expended, 2 targets destroyed, no inbound fire, no casualties. Standard operational notation for a strike mission that represents the complete neutralization of an Iranian attempt to build a kill capability against the most sophisticated aircraft the United States operates. Strategic implications are harder to quantify, but not impossible to describe. Iran's air defense establishment has, since the 12-day war and through the events of March 22, 2026, experienced a systematic dismantlement of its most capable systems. The Tor M1 network that remained operational after June 2025 is now reduced. The communications infrastructure supporting radar data relay in the Isfahan corridor has been degraded. The technical personnel who possessed the specific expertise to configure and operate the detection relay architecture that enabled the March 22nd lock, those individuals are no longer available to the program. The IRGC Air Defense Force faces a fundamental strategic problem that no system configuration can resolve. They are attempting to defend against a weapon system, the B-2 Spirit, that was specifically designed for exactly the threat environment they represent. The stealth geometry, the electronic warfare suite, the integrated data link connectivity, the joint kill chain that converts any detection event into a targeting solution. All of it was built with an adversary like Iran in mind. There is a reason the United States spent 50 years and over $45 billion developing and fielding stealth technology. It was not for show, it was not for deterrence alone. It was for moments like 11:23 p.m. on March 22nd, 2026. Moments when an adversary achieves something technically remarkable and finds in the achieving of it that they have simply triggered a response they cannot survive. The Tor M1 crew had spent years preparing. They had positioned their system with care. They had built a detection architecture that required real ingenuity. And they had succeeded for 11 seconds at doing what no one else had done. One detail stuck with me going through the open source analyses of this engagement. The Tor M1 system's engagement control station displays a visual indicator when a hard lock is achieved, a specific graphic on the operator's screen, confirming the system has established a confirmed track on a target. The indicator illuminates in a particular color. The IRGC operators who designed the detection relay architecture had reportedly named that indicator, informally, in their operational documentation, the ghost light, because it was the indicator they expected would never illuminate against a stealth aircraft. It illuminated for 11 seconds, and then 41 minutes later there was nothing left to illuminate anything. The B-2 Spirit remains the most capable penetrating strike platform in any nation's inventory. No country has successfully engaged one in combat. No country has demonstrated a capability to reliably detect, track, and engage one at operational altitude. The events of March 22nd, 2026 did not change that assessment. If anything, they reinforced it, not by demonstrating that the aircraft is undetectable under all conditions, but by demonstrating that detection alone without the capability to engage and destroy is not a meaningful capability. It is merely a way to identify yourself as a target. Iran has not publicly acknowledged any of this. The IRGC Air Defense Force has not updated its public posture. Iranian state media has not reported on any unusual military activity in the Isfahan region in late March 2026. The vitrified earth northeast of Isfahan says something different. If you want to understand how these operations come together, the intelligence collection, the strike planning, the joint kill chain execution, subscribe to DefenseBeacon. We break down the operations that shape global power, and there is a great deal more to cover. Comment lock if you think the 41-minute response time demonstrates exactly the kind of deterrence. Credibility that keeps adversaries from making this mistake twice. The outcome of the March 22nd engagement was never in doubt from the moment Tor M1 radar painted a B-2 Spirit over Isfahan. Not because the Spirit is invincible, no system is, but because invincibility was never the point. The point is the kill chain. The point is what happens in the 41 minutes after someone is foolish enough, or brave enough, or desperate enough to flip that radar switch and pull a hard lock on the most capable stealth bomber ever built. The point is the glass plate northeast of Isfahan. Cold War tactics do not work against 21st century systems. Iranian air defense planners learned that in June 2025 over Fordow. They are relearning it, one battery at a time, over Isfahan. The lesson is expensive, and it is permanent. Next time on DefenseBeacon, the USS Philippine Sea was not the only asset repositioned in the northern Persian Gulf in the 72 hours following the March 22nd strike. 2 Virginia-class submarines operating in support of CENTCOM's expanded maritime presence had been tracking an Iranian Kilo-class submarine since early February. What happened in the Strait of Hormuz in the week after the Isfahan strike, and what the Kilo crew did not know about who was already behind them, is a story we will break down in full detail. That one is going to stay with you.